This is the PolarPro Recon, and this is the Freewell K2 lens filter system. In this video, we're gonna compare each of these variable ND filters to see which one performs better. Now, at the heart of each of these systems is a variable ND filter, but you also have the option to add on additional filters for various creative effects. Now, for transparency, this video is not sponsored. I purchased the Recon with my own money, but the K2 system was sent to me as a pre-production model. No one asked me to make this video, no one is reviewing it, and anything I say or express in this video is simply just what I think. However, if you do want to support me, the best way to do that is just go ahead, leave a comment down below. What lens filters do you want to see me compare? Or what camera gear are you interested in me reviewing? And if you like this video, remember to give it a thumbs up. Or if you want to see any of the other gear that I recommend, I have my Lightroom presets down in the description below, along with any of my camera gear recommendations. Tell me what you think of this.
Oh, there's a level on there. That's fun.
This piece.
So this goes on first.
You need to screw it on.
Oh no.
No! Exactly why having proprietary adapters is a problem. You lose them, it's game over. Now you have to put it on with all the snow on it. Now, starting with the K2 system, it is very similar to the original magnetic lens filter system designed by Freewell, but you can see that it is a lot larger. It still has the same magnetic lens cap, and once you take that off, you've got your first step of circular polarizer variable ND. This is the lighter 1 to 5 stop, but inside the case, you also get a darker 6 to 9 stop. And then on the inside, you have the base, which is a different size than the original system, so the two are not compatible. Now, if you take that off, you might wonder, well, how does the circular polarizer work? Because on the back of each of the ND filters, it says circular polarizer. Now, I've seen some people say, all you have to do is flip it around. That's actually not true. The circular polarizer aspect of the filter works regardless of which way you orient it. What you do have to do is get rid of the base, and then you just have an empty filter. You take this guy, and then whether or not you rotate it 90 degrees one way or 90 degrees the other way, that's how you activate the circular polarizer to remove reflections and do all that fun stuff.
There we go. Put it on and release. Nope.
Put it on?
Yeah.
And then let go. There.
Okay.
Now it's on.
There we go.
Oh. Point the level upwards.
Point the level up. There we go.
And then see the screwy tabs, the other red bits.
Yeah.
Tighten them.
Tighten them down. So we got this 6 to 9 stop ND, and then
the idea is that
so there's the idea that there's a little space in between that we can slide something else in there. The big thing that they added to the K2 system is this little latch that when you open up allows you to slide in additional filters like a mist filter or a streak filter, versus on the PolarPro system, all of that is done on the front of the lens. So here I have an additional clip-in filter. Now this is just a standard ND filters. Just because I'm not a huge fan of like gold, blue streaks, I'd rather add that later in post if it's something I really want. But essentially you just take it, you clip it onto the front, same sort of effect. Okay, so this is our filter kit. We've got all the parts. This is a mist filter. So we're going to pop this open here. It's the round side down, so that's easier to insert. Oh, that's good. So thoughts on the whole system? My initial thought is that we're not using this in the right scenario. It seems like you would use this in place of a matte box. Like if you had a more locked in setup, like on a tripod, and you had your camera kitted out a little bit, it seems more of a substitute for that. It's big. A little bit, and they get a little bit stuck in there. And it's just kind of clunky. If you're familiar with PolarPro's threaded variable ND filters, those go from 2 to 5 stop, and then you can buy the other one, which is a 6 to 9 stop. But this goes from 3 to 6 plus. Now, 6 is if you try to spin it all the way to 6, you'll notice that it kind of hits this little dent and it kind of tells you, hey, stop here. But if you want, you can put it into what I like to call the overdrive mode. And then there's this little red tab. Basically, it pushes it from 6 up to 7.5 stops of ND. Now that's super handy if you're in a pinch and you don't have time to swap out filters, but PolarPro says that you really shouldn't use it unless you're shooting with a 35mm lens or tighter. So 35, 50, 70, and that's because you'll start to get vignetting, which we'll talk about in the next test. Hey, Will. Check it out. That is the PolarPro Recon. So you remember that old Freewell system?
Yeah.
This is kind of like the product from PolarPro that I would say fills the same, like the market segment. Like they're both about the same price. Hold on, we're gonna separate. We're gonna separate. So there's a few parts here.
So we got a 3 to 6 stop filter.
Yeah. So what's your PolarPro filter?
Mine's I think 2 to 5 stops, which is good because honestly I think 5 stops is a little, like it's not really dark enough for a lot of situations. What is this like extra bit here where it's like,
now, I also picked up the 16 ND, which is about 4 stops of ND, and you can put that on the front. And basically what that does is it converts the 3 to 6 stops into a 7 to 10 stops. And again, if you decide to go into the overdrive mode, now you're looking at 11.5 stops of variable ND. Now, PolarPro went one step further and included this mini matte box. Now, you don't have to use it, but the nice thing is that it is a relatively quick attachment. You basically just slide back this little latch, you put the ring, and then you lock down the little lever, and now you have a matte box that attaches directly to the front of your lens filter. You don't have to worry about threading it, and it's a relatively small package if you are someone who wants to carry a matte box with you. So the nice thing here is the matte box is optional. You don't have to have it, but really the main feature is the fact that you can have a second stage lens filter. So you can stack them, which is, I think, the biggest advantage of these new systems that everyone's creating.
my initial thought is I like that this can be just a filter and then you can put on the matte box. The Freewell one is trying a little bit too hard to do everything at the same time. And I think that might be its downfall because it's like this big ND filter all the time, and then you can like slide some stuff into it and it can do everything, but it doesn't have the matte box on it. And I think this is maybe just a little bit more convenient. They're both pretty comparable though.
In their base configuration, the Freewell filter costs $499 and the PolarPro costs $399. But I would strongly recommend for an additional $100 picking up that additional ND filter, because then now the two filter systems are equivalent in how much ND you can get out of them. Let's look at some color accuracy and vignetting comparisons for each of these lens filters. On the left, you're looking at a reference photo taken with no lens filter of a blank white sheet of cardboard. On the right, you're looking at the PolarPro shot at 3 stops, and you'll notice it does have a little bit of a color cast. Now, if we change that to 6 stops, this is where you start to see some of the vignetting. Now, keep in mind, I'm shooting all of these test photos with my RF 15 to 35mm lens at 15mm, which tends to be the worst case scenario because a wide angle lens is gonna capture all the imperfections around the edge of the lens filter. If you're someone who shoots at 24 or 35mm, you definitely won't notice this vignetting as much as you will, or as much as you can in the test photos that I'm showing you. The Freewell system does a really good job of maintaining color accuracy, but what you'll notice is that it has these little blips of a vignette in each of the corners of the photo. And at first I thought I had maybe attached something wrong, but I'll show you what that is in a minute. And keep in mind, again, I'm shooting at 15mm. When you jump up to 5 stops, this is where the color cast of the Freewell starts to show. It has a pretty significant blue vignette color cast when you start to introduce the polarizing effect, the variable ND effect of this system. And then when you jump to the 6 to 9 stop, it actually gets a little bit more blue than our reference photo. And at 9 stops, that's probably the worst case scenario. Now keep in mind, we're comparing 9 stops on the Freewell to 10 stops on the PolarPro. In terms of color accuracy, I do feel like the Freewell wins out, but if we're talking about color consistency, where you compare the full range of photos, I do feel like the PolarPro wins, as long as you understand how to compensate for the color cast. So if you're shooting raw photos, it's easy to go in, adjust your white balance later to remove that yellow tint. I also tested each of these filters for polarization to see how it affected the reflections inside of a regular scene. Now, every ND filter is gonna have some amount of polarization. And if you know how ND filters work, basically there is an outer polarizer and an inner polarizer, and when you put them together and you rotate them, that's when you cut out the light. So the one thing I wanted to look for was how bad or how good the polarization was at each end of the variable ND. So if you take a look at this chart, the Freewell at 1 stop compared to the no filter, you'll notice that the reflections in the bottom right-hand corner in particular get removed. Now, if we rotate that and go all the way up to 5 stops, you'll notice that the reflection comes back. Similar when you look at the 6 to 9 stop, the 6 stop, the reflection's a little bit reduced, and then at the 9 stop, it comes back. Now, if you compare that to the PolarPro, again, to the reference image, you'll notice that it's actually more consistent. So there's still a reduction in the reflections at 3 stop, but the 3 stop compared to the 6 stop on the PolarPro is a lot more consistent. The reflection doesn't change as much. And I think for me, color consistency with polarization being consistent and the ND color cast being consistent is a more important variable than whether or not it is accurate to a reference photo taken with no filter. I also did a 90-degree blue sky test where I was rotated 90 degrees to the sun, and I think the same results that we were seeing in the first test kind of repeat here, where the Freewell looks a little bit more blotchy and the polarization is darker. You can notice specifically when you compare the 5 stops of the Freewell to the 6 stops of the PolarPro that the Freewell has this like sun lens flare coming through. Now, it's not that the Freewell is more susceptible to lens flares, it's just that the Freewell darkens the sky more, and so that lens sun streak becomes more apparent versus the PolarPro, which again, doesn't polarize as much and causes the image just to look smoother overall. And then I did a test looking directly into the sun, which didn't really have too much of a variation in results. But the one thing you'll notice that I pointed out earlier with those little dark corners from the Freewell lens filter, if you take a look at the corners, you'll notice that there is a bit of ghosting. And again, I thought, oh, maybe that's just some like barrel lens flare that I'm getting because the sun is going directly into the lens. But what it actually is the inner, it's this little inner variable ND base. I found that if I took it off, I was able to get rid of those ghosting artifacts. And I think what it is that Freewell didn't necessarily design this system to work with 15 millimeters or 14 millimeters or super ultra wide angle lenses. But I wanted to be sure, so I went indoors to do a more controlled lens flare test. And this actually was a good test to see just what the lens flares overall looked like. One of the disadvantages of both of these systems, other than the fact that they are a lot more expensive than a regular screw-on ND filter, is just that they're a lot larger than a regular screw-on ND filter. The other thing is that I abuse a lot of my lens filters. Like, let me show you. Like, I don't know if you can see it, but there are just micro scratches all over the front of this variable ND. And that's literally from it just being blasted with sand and dust and debris, which, you know, it doesn't matter in this case because this is like an $80 lens filter. I can just throw it out and get a new one versus these, if you damage it, it's like, oh my gosh, there goes like $200, $300, $400. I think the original Freewell system is really interesting. This whole concept of magnetic filters that you can add and remove. I think what I would have liked to have seen is instead of just, oh, like you can add and remove one layer of variable ND, is to then add like a mist filter. Like if I could take one of these that was a mist filter, and just go like that. In this size, in the small form factor of the original Freewell, but then, mist filter, streak filter, that would have been a product that I would have been more likely to use than something that is this large that I have to now figure out how to store in my camera bag. I don't know if it's valuable having all those streak filters, those mist filters. I know a lot of people like mist filters. Personally, that's something you can kind of fake in Photoshop. So if I was looking just for photo, I would actually go with the PolarPro, but then not even use the matte box. I do think that the PolarPro Recon is a better investment than the traditional screw-on filters that PolarPro makes. And the reason for that is, one, it's easier to grip this larger filter and change your ND setting, but also instead of buying two separate filters, you have one that you can leave on, and then when you want it to be darker, you just pop that on. You don't have to unscrew one and screw on the next. And when you consider the fact that this package here is the same cost as buying two separate filters, but now you get the benefit of having the matte box. Now you have a way to kind of improve the contrast in your images or in your videos. But I'm curious to hear from you. After seeing these test results and some of the examples and use cases, is there a lens filter system that I haven't considered? Go ahead, leave that down in the description below. And if you like to see more comparison videos like this, where I kind of do a technical breakdown, make sure you give this video a thumbs up. And if you aren't already and you want to see more videos like this, make sure you hit the subscribe button for lots of fun photo and video content. And if you do, I'll see you in the next one. This is the thumbnail. This is what I'm changing the thumbnail to. This right here.